I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to our combined Operation Freedom Briefing Dave versus the MSM video format series. I'd like to thank you for joining me today and thank you for supporting our platform in the myriad of ways all of you do. Number one, being able to find our content is in and of itself an act of support. Why? Because the content I produce solely for this platform is heavily censored and heavily suppressed. Why? Because the information we provide, the globalist syndicate, which, don't let anybody kid you, is alive and fairly well. Their goal is to block you from getting independent information that's not bought and paid for, that's not controlled opposition, information that puts you ahead of the curve, and that's what we deliver. 24/7, by the way, at davejanda.com, no censorship, all information that puts you far ahead of the curve. We hope you'll become part of our freedom family at davejanda.com, where I produce 4 to 5 other video format shows, as well as my 3-hour radio show on Sundays every week for you. Please, with the new year here, priceless content, you cannot not afford to be privy to it. We have a lot to look forward to. We just had, went through the inauguration season, right? Got through the election season. And again, remember, I got a lot of heat for this, I actually still do, where I've said repetitively that when folks years down the line look at what happened in the lead up to the election in 2024, that they would say, that was tough, but it was actually the easiest part, getting through and getting the right result on election day and through election day. And as I've said, the time between election day and inauguration day would be even more difficult. And frankly, it was. With all the chaos and crises that the globalist cult put into play, because they're not happy. And they're not willingly giving up power and control. And I also said the time period after Inauguration Day, for the days, weeks, and months, and several years to follow, would be seen as the hardest part. Because this is when the cult, the globalist cult, gets the most frantic, because they see it all slipping away out of their grimy, filthy, disgusting, criminal hands. And I believe they're going to have all these distraction events, right, to try to distract you from their real operation, right? And their real operation for takedown, for destruction of billions of people around the world, is through the takedown of the financial system. And they've rigged it. They have pre-positioned ordnance in the financial buildings and have lit the fuse to bring those buildings down in their own footprints. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's meant to. Again, on a public platform, that's as far as I can go. But the analogy is not an accident. They're bringing the financial system of the world, and they've pre-positioned themselves, but the last thing they want is for you to leave their buildings. They're putting announcements, just like occurred, remember? Back in 2001, when people in those buildings were told, stay in place, don't move, don't leave the building. They're trying to do the same thing, only they do it a little differently, right? They want you in their financial buildings that they're set to bring down by staying in paper assets, accumulating as much of that funny money that's backed by vapor as you can, to buy their paper bonds, paper stock certificates, by investing in entities that with a finger stroke and a button stroke can go poof. Entities that were decentralized at one point, but now the government has intertwined itself, so the government has co-opted them to a degree and actually intertwined the cult's debt-based system into aspects of the crypto world, such as with Tether, that is tethered to debt issued by centralized governments. And then you add quantum computing that can break encryption. Now, all those entities combined, I believe, are telling you to stay in the building and it's all going to be fine. And it's not. That doesn't mean you can't protect yourself. And myself and a number of my guests for years have told you what's coming, and it's here and now. And we've also told you, and I'll again reiterate it today, of what you can do to protect yourself and your family and all those who will listen to you. We are suffering and being attacked by a debt, D-E-B-T, virus. It's not a mistake. And it's not a coincidence. And it's not an accident. And it's not from incompetence. It's all planned. They're bringing the system down, the debt-based system down, and trying to entrap as many people as possible, because the more people they can trap, the more people that will come running to them saying, save me. Oh, people won't do that. Really? Just think back of 2019 and 2020 with this and this, right? 21, 22, right? Don't fall for it this time. No. Because they're going to offer you a solution that's nothing more than a financial digital, right? Called central bank digital currencies. Don't go there. But the debt is the fuse that's been lit that will bring down the system. From Zero Hedge, U.S. budget deficit swelled just in November of 2024, pushing fiscal 2025 shortfall 64% higher than the year previous. For the month of November, the deficit totaled $367 billion, 17% higher than November of 2023, and taking the total for the first 2 months of the fiscal year more than 64% higher than the same period a year ago. The federal deficit at the end of the fiscal year, which was the beginning of October, was $1.83 trillion in 1 year. The interest cost in a year was over $1 trillion, placing it in second place behind Social Security and for the first time ahead of defense spending in our country's history. The other entities that ran into the same problem, where interest expenses were greater than defense spending, was the Roman Empire. And soon after that happened, collapse. History, as my mom taught me, doesn't repeat itself, but it surely does rhyme. We have a big rhyming event coming in relation to the Roman Empire. We have $36 trillion in national debt. Now, how do you get out of debt? whether it's personally, whether it's your family, whether it's a country. You can grow out of it. You get a second job. You get a third job. You get jobs that pay. We can't grow this country out of 36 trillion. So you could default. Wait a minute. If you default, the whole system comes down. Probably not going to do that. But here's how you can default on your debt if you're the United States government. You can create funny money. You can pay off debt that's now worth dollars and depreciate the value of your dollar so much that you're actually paying back in, let's say, dimes or nickels or pennies. In other words, allow massive inflation to occur. What do you think they've been doing? They've been building up to this piecemeal. They've been boiling the frog, all of us being the frogs, the innocent public. But now they're about to really turn the heat up. Nick Giambruno recently wrote, "The federal debt endgame, a coming crisis." The United States federal government has the largest debt in the history of the world, and it's growing at a rapid rate, in fact, unstoppable. In short, the U.S. government is fast approaching its financial endgame. Here's why. Today, the U.S. federal debt has gone parabolic, amounting, as I mentioned, over $36 trillion and growing by the day. It's $1 trillion of new debt every 90 days right now. To put in perspective, listen to this. If you earned $1 per second, 24/7, 365 days a year, that amounts to about $31 million per year. It would take over 1,148,531 years if you made $31 million per year to pay off the current U.S. federal debt. That's if we don't increase it by $1. But we are. We're increasing it, as I mentioned, $1 trillion every 90 days. So then, how will the U.S. government repudiate its impossible federal debt burden? Here's what he says. My guess is they won't be very explicit about it. They're going to try to hide what they're doing. I agree. But it's hard to hide depreciating your own currency. That would look too much like a default. It would destroy the role of the U.S. as the center of the world's financial system. Given a choice, I don't think the U.S. government would choose immediate self-destruction, such as a default. Since power does not relinquish itself voluntarily, we should presume they'll decide to stealthily implement their federal debt jubilee through inflation. Inflation benefits debtors, allowing them, as I mentioned, to borrow in dollars and repay in dimes, nickels, pennies. And since the U.S. government is the biggest debtor in the history of the world, it stands to gain the most from inflation. So what should all of us who are awake do? You have to recognize the reality of this big picture. And then you have to act and position yourself. That means, now listen to what he says, and this is what we've told you. Unfortunately, too few people have listened. That means owning scarce and valuable assets that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. In other words, no counterparty risk, no debt associated with it. Like what? Gold, physical precious metals. This is what stood the test of time over 5,000 years. Physical gold, not paper. Physical gold, physical silver. Hard assets. Crucially, this excludes paper assets such as fiat currency in bank accounts. Remember, fiat currency backed by nothing. Well, it's backed by the faith and credit of the United States government. Well, faith? Got faith in this? What you've been experiencing? Credit? I just told you we're $36 trillion in debt. What? Yeah, it's a Ponzi scheme. Remember, fiat currency is the unbacked liability of a bankrupt government. My dad used to call it paper is vapor. Yeah, he was right. Further, once you deposit currency into the bank, this is important, and we've told you this, it's no longer yours. Technically and legally, That money that you deposit in a bank is now the bank's property. And what you own instead is an unsecured liability of the bank. Yeah. It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's not from incompetence. It's part of bringing down the building, and they want you in it. And I'm trying to pull you out of it. Nick Giambruno goes on. He wrote another article. The looming debt crisis. Is America following the path of the collapsed empire? Answer, short answer, yeah. Debt can topple even the most powerful empires. Whether it's Rome, Spain, France, Britain, or the Soviet Union, excessive debt has played a critical role in all of their declines. So he goes through different stages, 1 through 9. Let me give them to you because you haven't heard it before. The typical pattern is this. Stage 1, empires achieve success and become overconfident. Stage 2, overconfident leads to extravagant spending on luxuries and wars. Stage 3, empires finance this lavish spending by going into debt. All this sounds pretty familiar so far, right? Yeah, okay. 4, the debt grows to an unsustainable level and creates a crushing burden. Oh, sound familiar? 5, empires finance the debt through taxation and debasing their currency. So since the Fed took over the money printing capabilities of the United States government in 1913, they have debased the purchasing power of the US dollar by over 99%. That's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's not from incompetence. It's the long-range operation and plan of this criminal banking syndicate. Stage 6. The populace bears the brunt of debt repayment as empires raise taxes and debase the currency to the maximum extent until it causes internal instability. Yeah, that's where we are. 6. Between 6 and 7, actually. I think we've surpassed 6. 7. Empires cannot finance their militaries because of their debt burden. What did I just tell you? The debt has become larger than defense spending. We're at 7. This is usually the tipping point. 8. Underfunded militaries plus internal instability make empires vulnerable to foreign invasion, domestic revolution, civil war, and other existential dangers. 9. Collapse. President Trump and his entire administration were handed a bag of financial nuclear material that's radioactive. He's a smart guy, and there's smart people around him. But numbers are numbers. And they can try to do some things to try to make this less onerous for as many people as possible. But it really comes down to being able to protect yourself. Because that's what it... Just look at what happened in 2019 and 20 and 21 and 22 and 23. The people that made out the best during that whole goat rodeo that was contrived were people that didn't rely on government. People who relied on their own knowledge base, their own analytical abilities, their own hard work of doing the research of what's this thing all about? What's this about? What's this about, right? Yeah. So this is what Giambruno concludes. I don't think it'll be long before the exploding interest expense crowds out funding for defense, Social Security, and other domestic commitments. Many people will be unprepared for the collapse of the U.S. empire. Well, you'll be prepared because you're listening to this, and hopefully you'll share it with all those you know and love. However, when you look at the big picture, that's where I think we're headed. And just like the collapse of previous empires, yeah, debt will play a significant role in the takedown. When private businesses go bankrupt, shareholders get wiped out. When governments go bankrupt, those who hold their paper currency, their fiat currencies, get wiped out. Given the historical examples, one thing I think we can be sure of is that the U.S. government will try to service its debt costs with creating inflation, debasing their currency further, just like many other empires that collapsed did before them. That's terrible news for the U.S. dollar. I have little doubt the coming months and years will be the most chaotic of our lifetime, as I mentioned. When looking back on this time period, people will say, yeah, but the toughest period was after that inauguration period. Because the cult wants people to think that the new administration is the ones that are responsible for this, when in fact, this was set in the cards decades, many decades ago. Countless millions throughout history were wiped out financially, or worse, as previous empires collapsed because those people failed to see the correct big picture and take the appropriate action. I now turn to Jim Willey, who's a PhD in statistics. Banks, remember, who's responsible for this? Who set this all in stone? The banksters. And they have pre-positioned themselves to protect themselves when this comes down. Banks, the biggest lie of the modern world, he wrote. Banks, the temples of the modern age, but in reality they are the new face of slavery. Do you think these institutions are safeguarding your money, strengthening the economy, and making your life easier? The truth is, banks are colossal fraud machines designed to drive you deeper into a pit of debt and servitude. The world's largest banks are nothing more than criminal syndicates pulling the strings of the global economy from behind the curtain. They don't create money or wealth. They simply swap your hard-earned savings for fake currency through an intricate scam. The solution is breaking free from banks. So what's the solution? The first step is to break your dependence on banks. Learn to live debt-free, invest your wealth in tangible assets like gold and silver. Manage your finances through local, small institutions that are not tied to the global fraud machine. Don't let banks exploit you. Remember, every credit card bill, every loan, every small print contract is just another chain around your neck. Break the chains. The bottom line is the system is collapsing, and the collapse is inevitable to get worse. Banks will not save you because the real battle is to save yourself from them. Take the power back into your own hands. Speak out. Act now. The system only wins when we stay silent, when we don't act. We have a lot to be thankful for. And one of those things is having at least some semblance of analytical abilities to tell us what happened in the past, how it rhymes with today, and how the people who survived, who prospered in the past, when systems came down, what they did, and how we can apply those same principles. Things change, but many things stay the same. What is the same? Protecting yourself with entities that do not have debt, D-E-B-T, associated with them. No counterparty risk. As my dad used to say, who was the most brilliant financial mind I have ever come in contact with, and yes, I'm biased, but still, he used to say, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. And paper is vapor. Counterparty risk, debt. Avoid them. I thank you for joining me today. Please join us at davejanda.com. Become a member of our Freedom Family so you can get other information that I cannot discuss on public platforms because of censorship and targeting. But davejanda.com, the content I produce there, no one else has. And it's based on the contacts I've developed over 36 years from behind the curtain who are freedom fighters, who want to get the word out, and they get it out through me. It's very unique. It's the single greatest investment you can make for the new year. I hope you'll join us. Stay safe. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time today.